Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going way back to ancient Greece,
Yeah, 5th century BC to be exact.
and we're going to be talking about a sophist.
That's right, Hippias of Elis. Maybe not as famous as, say, Socrates,
But definitely someone worth getting to know.
because this guy was something else. He was like the ultimate multi-hyphenate, the ancient Greek version of a Renaissance man, centuries before the Renaissance even happened.
So what exactly does that mean? What was a sophist back then?
Well, think about a world where knowledge is power,
Okay,
and these traveling intellectuals, they were like the rock stars of their time. Sophists went from city to city, teaching rhetoric, philosophy, basically training young people for success in public life.
like the ultimate life coaches.
Yeah, you could say that.
And Hippias was one of the best.
He was definitely one of the most sought after. And get this, he claimed expertise in a mind-blowing range of subjects.
Wait, seriously, like what kind of subject?
Oh, just the usual. Poetry, music, math,
Okay, that's a lot already.
painting, sculpture, even practical skills.
Whoa, hold on. This guy's claiming to be an expert in everything. That's a bold claim.
It is, and it's one of the things that makes him so fascinating and kind of controversial.
Okay, but here's the thing. A lot of what we know about Hippias comes from Plato.
Right.
And Plato, well, wasn't exactly his biggest fan.
To put it mildly.
So how does Plato portray him?
Well, in his dialogues, Plato kind of sets up this contrast. He paints Hippias as this, let's say, a little arrogant, maybe even a show-off,
Compared to...
compared to Socrates, who's always presented as the epitome of wisdom and humility.
So Plato was throwing some shade.
Definitely a bit of that going on.
So is it fair to say that Plato's account of Hippias might be a little biased?
Well, we have to consider the source, right? Plato had his own agenda, but even he couldn't deny the sheer scope of Hippias's knowledge.
So maybe he was just a product of his time, a time when being a polymath was really valued.
Exactly, and in that context, Hippias was a superstar.
It makes you wonder, though, was it all just for show? Or was there real substance behind all that flash?
That's the million-dollar question, and to answer it, we have to look beyond Plato.
Okay, so where else can we look for information about Hippias?
Well, there's one really intriguing piece of evidence, a work that Hippias himself wrote called the Olympionic Baika Onograph.
Whoa, hold up. What was that?
It was essentially a record of all the victors of the Olympic Games.
Wow. So this guy who maybe liked to show off
Yeah,
also took the time to meticulously document the history of the Olympics.
he did. And it wasn't just some random list.
What do you mean?
It's actually considered the foundation for how we date the Olympics even today.
No way.
Seriously. So, yeah, maybe a bit of a showman, but also a meticulous historian. It's kind of a paradox.
Okay, that definitely makes me rethink my first impression of Hippias. And it reminds me, we can't always judge historical figures solely based on what other people say about them.
Exactly. It's always good to look at the evidence from multiple perspectives. And there's another side to Hippias that often gets overlooked, his philosophical work, especially his ideas about natural law.
Ooh, natural law. Okay, tell me more. What was his take on it?
Well, imagine a world where laws aren't just rules made up by kings and governments.
Okay, I'm imagining.
Hippias believed there were these universal principles inherent to humanity and the universe, something bigger than any human-made laws.
Wow, that's pretty deep and pretty radical for his time, I bet.
Absolutely. And it's an idea that had a huge influence. Later philosophical schools, like the Stoics, picked up on it.
So he wasn't just about wowing crowds with his knowledge. He was actually thinking about some pretty profound stuff.
He was. And this idea of natural law, it actually ties into another key part of Hippias's philosophy, his emphasis on self-sufficiency.
Self-sufficiency. Okay, how does that connect?
Well, he believed individuals should strive to be masters of many skills, not just to impress people, but to be self-reliant, not dependent on others.
Makes sense. Especially if you're a traveling teacher, constantly on the move.
Right. So maybe that know-it-all vibe, it wasn't necessarily all bad.
You think it came from a genuine place?
It's possible.
Yeah.
A passion for learning, a desire to empower others with knowledge.
So what are we thinking so far?
Yeah.
What's our initial impression of Hippias?
He's definitely a complex guy,
Yeah.
full of contradictions, and there's still so much more to discover about him.
Well, I can't wait to dive in deeper.
Me too. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore even more of Hippias's life and work, his contributions to mathematics, his legacy, There's a lot to unpack.
I'm ready for it.
You know, it's funny, though. Hippias was the supposed master of everything.
Yeah?
But he also had these very specific areas he was really into.
Like what?
Well, there's this fascinating mathematical discovery that's attributed to him.
Oh, really? Like what?
The quadratrix of Hippias.
The what?
Quadratrix. It's this curve with a really interesting history and some unique properties, too. It's said that Hippias actually used it to try and solve one of those classic problems.
What kind of problems?
Oh, you know the ones that obsessed ancient Greek mathematicians? Like trisecting an angle?
Okay, gotta be honest.
Yeah.
Trisecting an angle sounds a little intimidating.
Uh-huh. Yeah, maybe.
You know, we gotta keep things accessible here.
Of course.
Can you break that down for us non-math whizzes?
Absolutely. Imagine trying to divide an angle into 3 equal parts.
Okay.
The ancient Greeks were all about geometric constructions,
Right.
using only a straight edge and compass.
Got it.
They could bisect an angle perfectly in half, no problem,
Uh-huh.
but trisecting it, dividing it into those 3 equal parts,
Yeah.
that was way harder.
Uh-huh.
It was like their version of a mathematical Everest.
So Hippias thought he could conquer this ancient math puzzle.
He did, and that's where the quadratrix comes in.
Okay.
Imagine a curve created by combining straight lines and circles,
Okay.
and they're moving together in this very specific way.
Uh-huh.
That's the quadratrix.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And it turns out this curve,
Yeah.
it has a property that lets you, in theory, trisect an angle.
Okay, I'm trusting you on the geometry here.
Sure.
But the point is,
Yeah.
this wasn't just basic arithmetic.
Nope. The quadratrix is a pretty advanced tool.
Right.
And the fact that Hippias was working with it,
Yeah.
it shows a level of mathematical understanding that goes beyond just the basics.
I see.
It suggests he wasn't just reciting facts and figures.
Right.
He was actually engaging with complex problems,
Wow.
pushing those boundaries of mathematical knowledge.
It's like this adds a whole other layer to how we understand Hippias.
It does.
He wasn't just a smooth talker.
Right.
He had some serious intellectual horsepower going on.
Exactly. It also highlights how ideas can pop up in unexpected places.
Yeah, what do you mean?
You might expect a sophist to stick to rhetoric and persuasion,
I guess.
but here's Hippias, knee-deep in geometry, tackling these age-old math problems.
That's so cool. It's like history is full of these moments
Yeah.
where we realize things weren't as straightforward as we thought.
Totally.
It's a good reminder that people are always more complex than simple labels.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to look at things from different angles.
Exactly.
Remember how we talked about Plato's portrayal of Hippias?
Yeah, kind of shady.
Well, there are other sources that mention him.
Oh, really?
It's worth checking those out, too.
To get a more balanced view.
Exactly. If we only rely on Plato's account,
Yeah.
we might be missing a big part of the story.
So what other sources can give us some insight into Hippias?
Well, there's Plutarch,
Okay.
a Greek biographer and historian
Ah.
who lived centuries after Plato.
Okay.
He doesn't focus as much on Hippias' personality,
Good.
but he does give us some interesting insights into his work.
Okay, so what does Plutarch have to say? Does he back up Plato's claims?
Not really. Plutarch was actually writing about an early Roman king,
Oh,
Numa Pompilius.
okay.
He was trying to establish a timeline for his reign,
Uh-huh.
and guess what source he cites?
What?
Yep, Hippias' Olympionican anagraph.
So even centuries later,
Yeah.
Hippias' work on the Olympics was still considered a valuable resource.
Yes, but here's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
Plutarch mentions that Hippias didn't actually have solid evidence
What do you mean?
for his dating of the first Olympic Games.
So he might have gotten it wrong.
He suggests that, yeah, maybe Hippias got some things wrong.
Interesting. So even though his work was influential, some people still questioned its accuracy.
Exactly. And, you know, maybe that reputation for exaggerating things,
Yeah.
it kind of followed him even into this historical project.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And it reminds us,
Yeah.
even the most influential sources
Uh-huh.
should be approached with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Right.
Just because someone's considered an expert
Right.
or their work is widely cited
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like that saying, trust but verify.
Always question everything right.
A lesson that's as relevant today as it was back then.
Totally. Especially today when we're bombarded with information.
From all sides.
It's like Hippias is giving us a lesson from beyond the grave.
Uh-huh. What's that?
Don't just take my word for it, folks.
Yeah, I love it.
Do your own research.
Right. Which brings us back to that core question about Hippias.
Yeah. Was he a genuine polymath?
Or was he more of a master of self-promotion?
Someone who knew how to present himself as an expert.
Exactly. And the evidence kind of points in both directions.
How so?
On the one hand,
Yeah.
he was clearly interested in a ton of subjects,
Math, history, you name it.
and he was willing to dive into some really complex topics. But on the other hand, he might have overstated his expertise in some areas.
Right, like Plutarch pointed out.
Exactly. It's a puzzle.
And maybe we'll never fully solve it.
True, but that's what makes history so fascinating.
I agree. It's not about memorizing names and dates.
Nope.
It's about wrestling with these ambiguities,
Yeah.
trying to understand these complex figures from the past.
Absolutely. It's like putting together a giant puzzle.
With some missing pieces.
And we may never have the full picture.
But that doesn't mean we can't learn from the pieces we do have.
Exactly. And with Hippias,
Yeah.
I think we can safely say he was a product of his time.
A time that valued intellectual display.
But also had this genuine thirst for knowledge.
I see.
And a willingness to explore new ideas.
Qualities that are still relevant today.
Absolutely.
And who doesn't love learning new things and expanding their horizons?
Right.
It's like Hippias is a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge
Yeah.
is a lifelong journey.
And
That there's always something new to discover.
even in unexpected places.
So maybe we're not all going to be polymaths like Hippias.
Probably not.
But we can definitely learn from his spirit of intellectual adventure.
Absolutely. And I think that's a key part of his legacy.
Okay.
But there's more. Remember his work on the Olympic victors?
Yeah.
Despite its potential flaws, it highlights the importance of historical scholarship
Okay.
and the challenges of trying to reconstruct the past.
It's a good reminder that history isn't just facts.
Right.
It's a process of interpretation.
Exactly.
We need to think critically.
Yeah.
Question our sources. Be open to different perspectives.
Just like we're doing right now with Hippias.
Exactly.
And then there's Hippias's ideas about natural law and self-sufficiency.
Right.
These concepts have had a huge impact, influencing philosophical schools, legal systems throughout history.
Wow.
They speak to this idea that there are these universal principles
Yeah.
that connect us as human beings,
I see.
and that we should strive to be independent and self-reliant.
So even though Hippias might be a lesser-known figure to many,
Yeah,
his impact on intellectual history is undeniable.
right.
He challenges us to think about the nature of knowledge,
Yeah.
the value of interdisciplinary learning, the complexities of historical interpretation. It's a reminder that history is full of surprises, and even seemingly minor figures can have a huge impact on human thought.
Well put. I think we've covered quite a bit about Hippias today.
We have. What are your impressions so far?
He's definitely complex and controversial.
What stands out to you?
Well, in the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
we'll talk about what his story really means for us today.
I like it.
We'll look at the relevance of his ideas in the 21st century and consider what lessons we can really take away from this fascinating guy.
From ancient Greece.
That's right.
Okay, so we've explored the many sides of Hippias, from his polymath pursuits to his, controversial reputation. But the big question is, what does it all mean for us? Like, why should we in the 21st century care about this Greek sophist?
That's a great question. We can easily get lost in the fascinating details of history, but we should always ask, how can we learn from these figures?
Exactly. It's cool to admire Hippias's intellectual range or contributions to math, but how can we connect his story to today?
Well, one compelling thing about Hippias's story is that it forces us to rethink what it means to be an expert in today's world.
I see what you mean. Back in Hippias's time, being a polymath with broad knowledge was like the ultimate goal. Now we tend to value specialization.
That's right. We encourage folks to be experts in very specific fields. And while specialization has benefits, like it lets us push the boundaries of knowledge in specific areas, it also has some drawbacks.
Like what?
We can get too siloed, too focused on our own narrow field. We can lose sight of the bigger picture.
It's like we're all experts in our little bubbles, but we forget how those bubbles connect to each other and to the wider world.
Exactly. And I think Hippias, with his total embrace of learning across disciplines, offers a counterpoint to this hyper-specialization. He's reminding us there's value in exploring lots of subjects and making connections across fields.
It's like he's saying, don't be afraid to step outside your intellectual comfort zone. Explore new subjects and connect ideas across different fields.
Exactly. Who knows, maybe you'll discover talents or passions you didn't even know you had.
Maybe even a hidden talent for making clothes just like Hippias.
Right. But seriously, I think Hippias's approach to knowledge has a lot to offer us today.
Okay, how so?
He encourages us to always be learning, to be curious, and to see how knowledge is all interconnected.
It's like he's saying learning shouldn't just be about getting info in one specific field. It's about cultivating curiosity and connecting ideas across different areas.
You got it. And that kind of intellectual flexibility is more crucial than ever in our complex world.
Okay, so we might not all become polymaths like Hippias, but we can definitely learn from him. We can try to see those connections between fields and challenge ourselves to learn new things outside our comfort zones.
And by doing that, we become better thinkers, problem solvers, and more engaged in the world.
It's pretty inspiring for a guy who was often dismissed as just a showman. It's like, with all his flaws and contradictions, Hippias teaches us about lifelong learning and staying curious.
Totally. And as we wrap up our deep dive into Hippias, we'll leave you with this. In a world that loves specialization, how can we nurture that spirit of exploration and learning across different fields? How can we, like Hippias, find joy in connecting the dots between different areas of knowledge?
Those are some great questions to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new.
It was awesome exploring this fascinating guy with you.
And to everyone listening, keep those questions in mind. Stay curious, challenge your assumptions, and never stop learning. You never know what amazing discoveries are out there.
Happy exploring, everyone. We'll see you next time.